Chapter 1, Misunderstanding and Mockery. The classroom was silent, save for the occasional hum of the intergalactic computer systems processing data in the background. A mix of alien species sat at their desks, their eyes glowing with the dull intensity of academic focus. Humanity had always been considered a primitive species by most of the Galactic Federation, and this school, an institution designed to foster understanding among different worlds, was no exception. Today, however, was different. Alex Turner sat at the far end of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, his posture rigid. His brown eyes scanned the lectern at the front of the room, where Professor Zerdal, an ancient being from the Crassian Empire, lectured on the concepts of pain tolerance and physical endurance. The Crassian race was known for their ability to withstand immense pain and stress, often considering it a hallmark of strength. To survive the harshest environments of the galaxy, Professor Zerdal intoned, one must learn to transcend pain, to rise above it, to avoid it at all costs. Pain, after all, is weakness. The stronger species endure it, but the strongest species learn to never experience it. There were murmurs of agreement from around the room. Most of the alien students were of the same mindset: avoid pain, live longer, and evolve past the need to confront suffering. But Alex, a human, had long since learned to endure pain, and to him, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a part of life, something to be accepted, not avoided. Humans, for example, Zerdal continued, pointing toward Alex, are a species that has not evolved past the need for pain. Your kind seems to seek out suffering, as if it were something to be honored. A ripple of laughter spread through the class. Alex stiffened but did not react. He had learned long ago that in this academy, a human had to be invisible if he didn't want to stand out in the worst possible way. But today, the laughter felt different, a little sharper. And that was when he saw it. Curler Vashtieth, the Zalzari student sitting across the room, leaned forward with a smirk curling across his scaled face. Curler was everything Alex wasn't: confident, arrogant, and already firmly believing that humans were nothing more than an inferior species. His people, the Zalzari, were known throughout the galaxy for their unmatched mental prowess and technology. Their superiority was almost a given, and they looked down on most species. Especially humans. Well, Alex, Curler called out, the rest of the class turning toward him, are you saying that humans want to experience pain? That's absurd. Alex met his gaze without flinching. I never said we want pain. We just learn to face it, deal with it, and move on. It's part of being human. Curler scoffed, his elongated teeth glinting in the light. That's exactly what I'm saying. Humans are addicted to suffering. A weak species that can't even evolve past this primitive urge. He looked at the professor. Is this what you meant by strength, Professor Zerdal? Humans revel in their weakness? Zerdal's voice was measured, but there was a slight edge to it. Curler, let's not be hasty. While it is true that some species strive to avoid pain, others, like the Zalzari, learn to suppress it. Still, I think it would be instructive for us all to hear a human perspective on this. Alex, how would you define strength? Alex took a deep breath. The room had gone quiet, all eyes now trained on him. There was a heaviness in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Alex didn't want to be the subject of ridicule, but he also couldn't back down. This was about more than just him, it was about proving that humans weren't weak. Strength, he said slowly, carefully, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about how we respond to it. It's about our ability to keep going, to keep fighting, even when it feels like the whole world is against us. It's not about escaping suffering, it's about standing tall in the face of it. A few of the students nodded, but the majority seemed unimpressed. Curler's smirk only deepened. Interesting, Curler said, leaning back in his chair. But tell me, Alex, have you ever actually felt real pain? You speak of endurance, but can you truly endure what others of us have faced? I doubt your species has the capacity for such suffering. I've had my share, Alex replied, his voice steady. Pain is universal. Every species faces it, no matter how advanced they are. But how you handle it, that's what matters. The laughter from the other students was barely suppressed now. They weren't laughing at Alex's words, they were laughing at his naivete. The idea that a human could handle pain in the same way as a species like the Zalzari, who could manipulate their neural pathways to resist even the most excruciating sensations, was laughable to them. But Alex wasn't done. "Fine," Curler said, rising from his seat, his body language dripping with smugness. "Let's test this. You claim you can endure pain, yes? There's a Zalzari trial coming up, an ancient ritual that tests endurance, both physical and mental. Perhaps you would like to prove your strength there?" The other students went quiet at the mention of the trial. It was a dangerous and brutal test, one that few had ever passed. The very idea of asking a human to participate seemed absurd to many of them. And yet, it was exactly what Curler wanted, proof that humans could never match the strength of superior species. "I'll do it," Alex said, his voice cutting through the silence. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. He knew the trial would be difficult, he knew it would hurt, but this was no longer about just surviving. It was about showing these alien students that humans had a strength they could never truly understand. It was about proving that enduring pain was not the same as fearing it. Curler grinned, knowing that this would be his victory. "We'll see if you can handle it," he said. As Alex left the lecture hall, his mind raced. He wasn't sure what the trial would entail, but one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let them define humanity by their own narrow standards. If humans were weak for enduring pain, then let them see how strong a human could truly be. The gauntlet had been thrown. And Alex Turner wasn't going to back down. Chapter 2, The Trial of Pain. The wind was sharp as it whipped through the alien landscape, sending tendrils of dust and debris spiraling into the hazy sky. Alex's boots crunched against the uneven ground, each step heavy with anticipation. The Zalzari trial was held in a desolate valley, surrounded by jagged rock formations that seemed to loom like silent sentinels. The other students from the academy had gathered in a large, circular formation, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Alex could feel their eyes boring into him, and he knew that, despite their outward indifference, they were waiting for him to fail. Curler stood at the center of the group, a towering figure of scaled muscle and cold confidence. His sharp, reptilian eyes locked onto Alex's, and the challenge between them was unmistakable. "You're about to experience something that even the toughest beings in the galaxy fear," Curler said, his voice smooth and calculating. "The trial is designed to break the spirit, to push you to the very edge of your endurance. And you, human, think you can handle it?" Alex didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His stomach was tied in knots, his mind buzzing with the weight of what was to come. The trial was no joke, no one who had entered had ever come out unscathed. The Zalzari trial was a test of physical and mental limits. Failure meant not just humiliation, but the potential for permanent injury. But Alex had no choice. His pride, the pride of his species, was on the line. He had to do this. He had to prove that humans weren't fragile. He had to show that they could endure the unimaginable. "Are you ready, human?" Curler asked again, this time with a mocking edge to his voice. He seemed to take pleasure in watching Alex squirm. Alex took a deep breath and stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Let's get it over with." The circle of students parted, and a large metal structure emerged from the ground. It was a complex contraption of jagged spikes, glowing orbs, and moving mechanical arms. This was the first phase of the trial, the pain weaver. It was designed to subject the body to extreme sensations, forcing the participant to maintain focus and composure. Alex had no idea what to expect. But he knew it wasn't going to be easy. As he approached the structure, a series of hissing sounds erupted from the machine, and a set of glowing needles extended toward him. They were sharp, designed to pierce the skin and administer a cocktail of electric currents meant to simulate extreme physical pain. It was the first stage in breaking down a person's resistance, to see if they could withstand the shock. Curler stepped forward, gesturing for Alex to step into the center. "Go on, human. Prove to us that you can take it." Alex swallowed, his throat dry. but he refused to show any sign of weakness. He stepped into the center of the machine, his heart pounding in his chest. He could already feel the cold metal against his skin as the machine hummed to life. The first needle struck his left arm. A jolt of electric current surged through him, like fire spreading through his veins. His muscles spasmed involuntarily, and he clenched his teeth to keep from crying out. The pain was excruciating, far worse than anything he had ever felt before. His mind screamed for him to pull away, to escape the agony, but he fought it down. Focus. Endure. The second needle found his right arm, and this time the current felt like molten lava being injected into his bloodstream. His legs threatened to buckle beneath him, but he kept them planted. His body was shaking, but he didn't give in. He couldn't. Not with all those eyes on him. From the corner of his vision, he saw Curler watching him closely. The Zalzari's expression was unreadable, but the flicker of interest in his gaze was unmistakable. He was waiting for Alex to break. But Alex wouldn't. Not this time. The needles began to move again, striking his sides, his legs, his chest. Each time, the sensation grew more intense. His entire body felt as if it were being torn apart from the inside out. His teeth ground together so hard that his jaw ached. Sweat streamed down his face, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't. The machine's hum grew louder, its power surging through him. For a brief moment, Alex's vision blurred. He could feel his heart racing, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But he clung to the one thought that kept him grounded: I can do this. I will do this. And then, as if sensing the breaking point, the machine ceased its assault. The needles retracted, and the lights dimmed. Alex stood there, his chest heaving, his body shaking violently from the aftershocks of the pain. But he had made it through. A silence fell over the gathered students. No one spoke. No one moved. Curler's voice broke through the stillness. Impressive, he said, though there was no true admiration in his tone. Instead, there was something else, something darker. But the trial isn't over yet. The next phase was worse. The ground beneath Alex's feet cracked open, and from the fissures, large mechanical arms shot up, each holding a glowing, razor-sharp blade. These blades were designed to slash, to tear. They weren't meant for just pain, they were meant for damage. This was the real test. Alex's heart raced as the first blade came for him. He dodged, but the tip grazed his side, sending a new wave of pain through him. Blood trickled down his skin, but he couldn't focus on it. His mind was already flooded with adrenaline, the pain receding into the background as he fought to survive. The blade slashed again, narrowly missing him. He moved with a fluidity he hadn't known he possessed, ducking and weaving with a precision born from years of instinct and training. He had to finish this. There was no room for error. Another blade whistled through the air. This time, it wasn't a glancing blow. The blade sliced across his arm, leaving a deep gash. Pain exploded through his body, but Alex didn't stop. He pressed forward, moving faster, more deliberately, until he finally reached the center of the arena. With a final, desperate sprint, Alex leaped into the heart of the trial and pressed the button that stopped the mechanical arms. The blades retracted, and the arena fell silent. Alex stood, panting, blood staining his shirt and dripping from the cuts on his body. But he had done it. The trial was over. The silence lingered for a few moments before Curler's voice broke through, this time with a note of grudging respect. You actually did it. Alex turned toward him, bloodied but unbowed. Yeah. I did. Chapter 3, Beyond Endurance. The arena was quiet now, the hum of machinery that had once filled the air fading into an eerie silence. The remains of the Zalzari trial lay scattered around Alex, the bloodstains on the ground, the lingering scent of ionized metal and scorched flesh. His body screamed for rest, his muscles burned with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. He hadn't broken. He had passed. Curler was standing at the edge of the arena, his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but Alex could see the flicker of surprise beneath the arrogance. The trial had been designed to break him, to prove that a human could never endure what beings like the Zalzari could. But Alex had done more than survive. He had thrived. As Alex slowly stood up, wincing at the pain in his legs, Curler finally stepped forward, his steps slow and deliberate. The crowd of alien students that had gathered around the trial platform seemed to lean in, waiting for the next move. It was clear that Curler's opinion still held sway over them. "Well," Curler said, his voice low, almost grudging, "I must admit, you have exceeded expectations, human." He took a moment to let his words sink in, his cold eyes narrowing slightly. "But this trial is only one piece of the puzzle. The question is, can you endure more than just physical pain? Can you endure what others of us cannot even begin to fathom?" Alex wiped the blood from his brow and straightened up, locking eyes with the Zalzari. He wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let Curler's challenge slip away. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. "What do you mean?" Alex asked, his voice still steady despite the exhaustion pulling at him. His wounds ached, but his resolve was stronger. He wasn't backing down now. Curler's lips twitched in something between a sneer and a smirk. "You've survived physical agony, but what about the mind, human? You have no idea what true suffering is until your psyche is pushed beyond its breaking point. You think you're tough? Let's see how well you handle fear." The crowd shifted, murmurs passing between the students. This was something different, something Alex hadn't expected. The challenge had been physical, but this was psychological warfare. Without warning, the ground beneath Alex's feet began to tremble. The arena walls shifted, their smooth surfaces splintering into jagged, uneven shapes. Alex barely had time to react before the temperature dropped drastically, turning the air into something cold and suffocating. His breath came in short, panicked bursts as the arena transformed around him. The pain had been tangible, physical. But this was different. The very atmosphere seemed to warp and distort, as if trying to pull him into another realm. He heard whispers, low and unnerving, brushing against his ears. Shapes flickered in the periphery of his vision, shadowy figures that seemed to move just beyond the light. "Do you see it?" Curler's voice rang out, clear and cutting. "The fear? The chaos? This is the true test. It's not your body that will break, but your mind. The Zalzari are masters of mental resilience. We know how to push ourselves into the abyss and pull ourselves out. But you humans? You've never known terror like this." Alex's heart raced as the whispers grew louder, and the shadows around him seemed to close in. His mind screamed for escape. This wasn't something he could physically fight, there was no enemy to strike, no attack to dodge. It was his own fear, his own uncertainty, flooding every inch of his being. But Alex wasn't some alien creature that could simply shut off emotions. He was human. And his kind had learned to face their fear head-on, to endure it, to survive it. He clenched his fists and closed his eyes, forcing his mind to focus. The darkness swirling around him? It wasn't real. The terror clawing at his consciousness? It was only an illusion. He had faced worse. He had lost people. He had stood on the edge of death more times than he cared to admit. And yet, here he was, still standing, still fighting. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but Alex pressed on. His breathing slowed. He wasn't going to let his mind break. Not now. A voice broke through the chaos, cutting through the fog of fear. "You think this will make you break?" Alex said, his voice steady, though his heart was still racing. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Curler, to the voices, or to himself. "I've faced worse than this. Fear doesn't control me." As if on cue, the world around him shifted again. The temperature surged, heat flooding the arena. The shadows around him twisted, turning into monstrous shapes, dark, distorted creatures that seemed to leer at him with eyes full of malice. But Alex didn't flinch. He stood firm, his gaze unyielding as he stared into the monstrous forms. This was nothing more than a mental trick. Fear was powerful, but it only had power if you let it. With a sharp exhale, he took a step forward. And then another. The creatures began to fade, the whispers slowly silencing, as if they couldn't hold on to him anymore. He wasn't going to let them. When the illusion finally dissolved, the arena returned to its original form, empty, quiet, and still. The coldness receded, the fear dissipating like smoke in the air. Alex stood, breathing heavily but victorious. Curler, for the first time since this challenge had begun, appeared genuinely surprised. His eyes narrowed as he took a step forward, studying Alex with renewed interest. You didn't break," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Alex wiped the sweat from his brow and met Curler's gaze, unwavering. "Humans don't break. We might bend, we might stumble, but we don't break." A tense silence lingered in the air, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Curler's lips curled upward, almost imperceptibly. It was the barest hint of a smile, but it was there, and it spoke volumes. "You have earned my respect, human," Curler said, his voice low but no longer mocking. "And perhaps, after all, your kind is not as weak as I thought." The other students exchanged looks, whispers of awe and admiration filling the air. Alex had done what no one had expected. He had passed the trial not just physically, but mentally as well. And in doing so, he had proven something far more significant than endurance. He had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Not through brute strength or grandiose displays of power, but through resilience, determination, and the will to keep going, no matter the cost. And as Alex looked out over the gathered students, he knew one thing for sure: he had made his mark. Chapter 4, The Unseen Battle. The days following the trial were a blur for Alex. He could still feel the lingering aches in his muscles, the fading burns on his skin. But they weren't what lingered the most. What gnawed at him was the quiet shift in the way the other students treated him. It wasn't just respect anymore, it was something deeper, something unspoken but tangible. He was no longer just a human among aliens, he was the human. And that made all the difference. He sat in the mess hall the next day, the soft hum of conversation around him, but his focus was elsewhere. The wide windows overlooked the barren desert landscape, with the distant outline of towering structures that marked the boundaries of the academy. He absently pushed his food around on his tray, the taste lost on him as his thoughts spiraled back to the trial. Curler had left him with a warning, a challenge that Alex hadn't forgotten. The Zalzari had made it clear that physical endurance wasn't the ultimate test. There were deeper trials to be faced, ones that went beyond what Alex had imagined. The world around him was vast, and with it came an array of dangers he hadn't yet seen. "You're deep in thought," a voice broke his reverie. Alex turned to find Zira, a fellow student, standing next to his table. Her black chitinous skin glimmered under the overhead lights, and her 6 eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made him shift slightly in his seat. Zira was one of the more reserved students, a quiet observer. But there was always something calculating about her. She wasn't one to make small talk, and Alex could tell this wasn't going to be one of those moments. "Did you think the trial was over?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. Alex met her gaze. "I'm still here," he said with a tired smirk, "so yeah, I thought I made it." Zira studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You passed. But don't think for a second that means you've won," she said quietly. "The Zalzari don't give respect easily, but they will never stop testing you. And the hardest part of all is coming up. Not the pain. Not the fear. Something deeper." He frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. "And what is that, exactly?" Zira leaned closer, her multiple eyes narrowing. "You think the Zalzari want to see how strong you are? They don't care about that. They want to see if you'll break from within. They'll find your weaknesses, and they'll use them against you. That's how they break you." Alex's stomach tightened at her words. "And what should I do? Wait for it to happen?" She shook her head, the faintest hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You've already shown them what you can do physically. Now you need to show them something else. You need to show them who you are. Not just how strong you can be, but how strong you'll stay when it feels like everything is falling apart. Before Alex could respond, the alarms blared through the hall, a sharp, shrill sound that cut through the din of the room like a knife. Instantly, the students around him stood, their expressions changing from casual indifference to sharp focus. Something was happening. Something big. "Get ready," Zira said, her voice low and serious. She was already moving toward the exit, her long limbs moving with fluid efficiency. Alex stood up quickly, feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through him. He wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but he could feel the tension in the air. The lights flickered, and the hum of the Academy's automated systems went quiet. "What's going on?" he asked Zira, as they moved quickly through the corridors, the echo of their footsteps reverberating through the steel walls. "There's been a breach," she said tersely. "A group of scavengers got through. We've got to get to the central control room and lock down the Academy." Scavengers. Alex's mind raced. He had heard of the groups that roamed the fringes of the galaxy, ruthless individuals who would do anything to survive, even if it meant raiding well-defended places like this Academy. He'd been told it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. But the reality of it felt different. The walls around them vibrated as a blast shook the structure. Alex's heart skipped a beat as they rounded the corner and headed toward the security station. A stream of students were already moving through the halls, weapons in hand. They didn't have time to waste. "I'll handle the controls," Zira said as they reached the central hub. "You'll need to hold them off. Can you do that?" Alex's blood ran cold for a moment, but then his focus returned. There wasn't time to question his abilities. He had to act. He nodded sharply. "Yeah. I can handle it." As Zira began typing furiously at the terminal, Alex grabbed the nearest weapon, a plasma rifle. The weight of it was unfamiliar, but it was better than nothing. He moved to the nearest access door, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. The stillness was unnerving. Then, he heard it. A thump. Then another. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The scavengers were close. Alex steadied his breathing, his grip tightening around the rifle. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting for something more, the respect of the aliens who had once seen him as weak. The chance to prove to them, and to himself, that humanity wasn't just a footnote in the galaxy's history. They were fighters, survivors. "Zira, how long?" Alex called out. "I'm almost there," Zira replied, her voice tight with urgency. "But you need to hold them off just a little longer." Alex's heart raced as the door slid open, revealing a group of scavengers. Their faces were covered with masks, their clothes ragged and torn from their travels. They were armed, their weapons raised as they spotted Alex. Without hesitation, Alex opened fire, the plasma blasts sizzling through the air. The scavengers scattered, some of them returning fire while others ducked for cover. Alex moved quickly, positioning himself behind a pillar as the shots whizzed past him. "You're going to need to do better than that," one of the scavengers shouted. Alex's chest tightened, but he held his ground. The blaster in his hands was steady now, his aim precise. The sounds of battle filled the air, but in the chaos, Alex felt a clarity. This was what he had trained for, what he had fought for. He was human. And that made him a force to be reckoned with. As the scavengers fell back, Zira's voice rang out behind him. "I've got it. The Academy is locked down." With the press of a button, the door behind Alex slammed shut, sealing off the rest of the compound from the intruders. The battle was over, at least for now. The scavengers were gone. But the real war, the one that would define Alex's place in this universe, was just beginning. Zira walked up beside him, her expression unreadable but proud. "You did well. I think the Zalzari will be watching you even closer now." Alex looked out over the control room, the weight of the rifle still in his hands. "Good. Let them watch," he muttered. The storm had passed. But there would be more. There would always be more. And this time, Alex was ready. Final chapter, The Legacy of Humanity. The Academy had gone eerily quiet after the breach. The scavengers had been driven off, their attempt to infiltrate crushed under the weight of a single human's will. Alex stood in the control room, surrounded by the remains of their would-be invaders. His hands still gripped the plasma rifle, but the adrenaline had begun to fade. The battle was over. The threat was eliminated, for now. Zira stood beside him, her eyes scanning the silent monitors around them. She had said little since the last blast rang out, but Alex could feel her studying him, her mind turning over the events of the past few hours. "You're something else," Zira finally said, breaking the silence. "I didn't think anyone could stand their ground like that against real danger. But you've got something they don't teach at the Academy." Alex glanced at her, half a smile tugging at his lips. "What's that?" "Grit," she said simply, her voice steady. "The Zalzari admire strength, yes. But they respect survival. And you've shown you can survive anything they throw at you." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Alex wasn't sure if he was supposed to feel pride or fear. The Zalzari respected him now. They'd seen him endure pain. But what did it mean when the galaxy's deadliest beings were watching him so closely? "Where do we go from here?" Alex asked, lowering his weapon and looking out through the Academy's windows. He could see the distant horizon, the jagged mountains beyond, silent and unforgiving. A reminder of the ever-present danger that awaited them outside. Zira's gaze followed his. "We keep pushing forward. The Zalzari have only just begun testing you. But so far, you've proven one thing: humanity isn't something they can easily dismiss." There was a pause. The hum of the Academy's systems filled the space between them. Alex shifted uncomfortably. "But do they want us to prove ourselves, or do they just want to see us break?" Zira turned to him, her expression unreadable but thoughtful. "The Zalzari aren't cruel just for the sake of cruelty. They test every race, every individual. But they are ruthless. And right now, you're an anomaly. They don't understand you. And that's what makes you dangerous." Alex let out a slow breath. "I never asked for this. All I wanted was to survive." Zira placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. "Survival isn't just about living. It's about who you become while you're living. You've changed since you got here. You've adapted in ways they didn't expect." "Maybe," Alex said, his voice soft but determined, "but there's more to it than just surviving. There's something bigger than us in all this." Zira didn't respond right away. Her 6 eyes narrowed in contemplation. "You're not wrong. There's a war coming. Not just with the scavengers or even with the Zalzari. This is bigger. The balance of power in the galaxy is shifting. And humanity, humans like you, might be the key to tipping it in a new direction." Alex felt the weight of her words sink deep within him. He had thought that surviving the trial, the tests, the battles, was enough. But now he realized, this was just the beginning. The beginning of something far larger than himself. Something that would shape the future of the galaxy. A future he would have to fight for, not just with his body, but with his very existence. The door to the control room slid open, and a group of Academy leaders entered, Zalzari, mostly, along with a few humans who had made their way to this point. Their eyes, bright and cold, assessed him as if he were a new piece on a game board. "You've performed well," Curler said, his voice deep and resonant. His piercing gaze swept over Alex, lingering on his tired form. "The Academy will remain safe, thanks to you." Alex gave a quick nod but said nothing. He didn't need their praise. He didn't need their validation. "You have shown the necessary will to survive," Curler continued, "but the time is fast approaching when survival will no longer be enough. There will be harder trials, trials that will require more than just physical strength. It will demand your intellect, your cunning, and your capacity for sacrifice." Alex swallowed hard, understanding the weight of what the Zalzari was saying. The survival tests were just the beginning. The real challenge would be to hold on to his humanity when faced with decisions that could break a person, or worse, change them forever. "And what happens when we pass?" Alex asked, his voice tight. Curler regarded him with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "When you pass, you will be ready. Ready to face the enemies the galaxy doesn't even know exist. The scavengers were only a taste. The real fight will come soon enough. And if you're ready, then perhaps you will be the one to lead your people into the new age." The words were like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. But Alex couldn't ignore the truth in them. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was still a young, fragile species in comparison. The trials he faced were shaping him into something new, something that could change the course of history. But there was one thing he knew for certain now. He wasn't going to fight this battle alone. Not anymore. "Understood," Alex said finally, his voice low but filled with resolve. "I'll face whatever comes. And I'll make sure humanity's name is never forgotten in the stars." Zira gave him a sharp, approving nod, and for the first time since he had arrived at the academy, Alex didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged, like he was part of something greater than himself. A part of the force that would shape the future. The door closed behind them, and the world outside waited. Alex stepped forward. The fight was far from over.